Romeo and Juliet. On that warm summer's evening, the Capulet house was the brightest place in Verona. The walls of the ballroom were hung with silk tapestries, and a candlelight from a dozen crystal chandeliers threw rainbows onto the heads of the masked dancers as they twirled through the music and laughter that filled the air. On one side of the room, near a table laden with food and drink, stood the young girl, Juliet, the daughter of Lord and Lady Capulet. She had removed her mask and loosened her black hair so that it hung about her shoulders. Her face, flushed from the heat of the dance, was radiant, and her beauty was obvious to all who looked at her. She seemed unaware that someone was watching her. A few steps away, a young man stood gazing at her. He had never seen such loveliness before in his whole life. Surely I must be mistaken, he thought. Surely if I look a second time I will find that her eyes are too close together, her nose too long, or her mouth too wide. Moving slowly towards her as one in a trance, the young man lifted his mask so that he could see Juliet more clearly, and the more he gazed at her, the more perfect her face seemed. Almost without thinking, Romeo pushed his way towards Juliet until he found himself standing at her side. Gently he took her hand. Juliet turned her head, her soft brown eyes wide with surprise. On the other side of the room, Tybalt, Lord Capulet's fiery young nephew, recognized the young man who was holding Juliet's hand, and strode angrily towards the door. But just as he was about to leave, his uncle caught him by the sleeve. "Where are you going?" asked Lord Capulet. "To fetch my rapier," Tybalt replied. "Lord Montague's son, Romeo, has dared to enter the house." "Leave him," said Lord Capulet. There was a terrible feud between the Capulets and the Montagues, and the Prince of Verona had forbidden any more fighting between the two families, on pain of death. Tybalt's face was ashen with rage. But tomorrow Romeo will boast to his friends about how he danced at the Capulets' ball and escaped without being noticed. He will make us look like fools. Lord Capulet put his hands on Tybalt's shoulders, forcing him to stop and listen. "I hate the Montagues as deeply as you do, Tybalt," he said. "Our two families have been at war with each other for as long as anyone can remember. But the prince's word is law in this city, and there is to be no more fighting, you understand? Now if you cannot keep your temper like a man, go to your room and sulk like a boy." Tybalt broke free from his uncle's grasp and glared across the room at Romeo. "You will pay for this one day, Montague," he vowed softly. "I will make you pay." Juliet glanced at the young man beside her, at his glossy brown hair and startlingly gray eyes that were filled with shyness and wonder. His mouth was curved in a half-smile, and though it made her blush to look, Juliet found that she could not take her eyes from his face or her hand from his. "My lady," Romeo said, "if my hand has offended yours by holding it, please forgive me." "My hand is not offended, sir," said Juliet, smiling at him. "And nor am I." Some power that neither of them understood had drawn them together like a moth to a flame. They kissed, and the ballroom, the musicians and dancers seemed to disappear, leaving them feeling as though they were the only two people in the world. When their lips parted, Romeo looked at Juliet and thought, "All those other times when I thought I was in love, I was like a child playing a game. This time I'm truly in love. I wonder could she possibly feel the same?" Before he could ask, an elderly woman bustled up to them. "My lady," she said to Juliet, "your mother is asking for you." Juliet frowned, shrugged helplessly at Romeo, then turned and walked away. Romeo caught the old woman by the arm. "Do you know that lady?" he demanded. "Why, sir, she is Juliet, Lord Capulet's daughter," said the woman. "'T've been her nurse since she was a baby. And know who you are too, young man. Take my advice and leave this house before there's trouble." That night Juliet couldn't get to sleep. She could only think of Romeo. It was warm, and the moonlight was shining on the trees in the orchard below. Juliet stepped out onto her balcony, but she was so troubled by what her nurse had told her that she hardly noticed how lovely Theochard looked.